My name is Nancy Spicciarini, and I am a member of the ECS team. I work with the middle leaders, and I just love it. I feel like it's a real privilege. And welcome to the ISL, ECIS Left. And it's called the ISL, ECIS Law, because it's a collaboration with my previous school that I was there for 30-something years. And it's a privilege that I can continue that collaboration with an organization that I loved and was really part of my family for quite a long time. When we think about the law, we have 4 objectives. And the first is why? Promote unique insights. And it's not just our guests, but it's also you connecting with one another. So that's what we hope to gain when, after you do hear our guests speak, how are you connecting with one another to get those insights? Elevate voices, all our voices in this room. We already have 24, 25 people in this room. We want to elevate everyone's voices. We like the idea of embracing that collective wisdom in a room. And lastly, we'd like to think that we're going to provide some resources for sustainable practices. And I think Lola and James will be doing that for you for tonight. Our virtual protocols, as we continue, is connections. If you see someone beautiful like Hala who has a heart of gold, you might say, you know what, Hala, I love talking to you. You might give her a message and say, could we meet after this session? Why not? If you're on social media, please consider using the hashtag ISL ECIS Loft. And then for our large group, please be on mute because we're going to have over 30 to 40 people today. But if you have any questions, I have a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Yasmin, and she's here, and she's going to be looking at the chat and looking for any questions you might have. And then in the breakout rooms, please unmute. And if you could, we all have beautiful eyes. Could you put on your camera so we don't have to talk in a black box? I understand in the big group, you want to relax, but in the small group, I look at Heather's eyes and I think, oh, they're beautiful. I really want to see them in the small group. So please, if you can. And our focus for tonight is leading with impact, creating a positive school culture. And I'm now going to introduce our guests. We have, I just call her Lola. And she is someone, I just call her Lola, and she is someone who I met 2 years ago, who I saw in a virtual context from LinkedIn. And then when we saw each other, it was almost like we should have been friends 20 years ago. The connection was immediate. And then our other guest is James Penstone. He is right now at the Community School in Zurich. But a big shout out to James because he is going to the British School of Brussels. Soon as the head teacher, I think that's the terminology, director, James will tell a little bit. So I'm going to ask Lola and James as I stop share. Lola, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for this warm invitation to this session. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for building the momentum up. I was saying to Nancy earlier, building up the momentum to this session. It's really good to hear all your thoughts and ideas on the topic we're discussing today. My name is Lola Wright-Odusoga, and I'm an international school leader. I've worked in so many different schools in the Middle East, in the UK. My main area is school startup, starting up school, getting things ready, and just, making sure everything is working as it should be, from policies to procedures to student admissions and curriculum development.
Hello. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Why don't you share something about yourself now, please?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Really nice to see everyone here. And I know a few people actually on the call, which is wonderful. Nancy, first of all, a huge thank you to you for creating this opportunity and for setting us up to have a conversation like this. I'm really excited to engage in this conversation I think we're all very interested in. So my name is James. I'm currently the secondary principal at the Intercommunity School of Zurich, which was founded 64 years ago. And we are a medium-sized school of approximately 800 students. We're a fully IB school, so we follow the IB curriculum. And we are proudly called the Intercommunity School because we are very proud of our sense of community here. Previously, I've worked at a large international school in Thailand called Bangkok Patana School with some 2,300 students. And Nancy captured it very well, I think, in terms of where I am in a transition mode right now. So at the end of this term, as we call it, or semester, I will be leaving ICS and be joining the British School of Brussels as the principal there.
Thank you so much, James. So we have these two fabulous guests, and how are we going to be working our evening within the next hour? So we're going to have a conversation for about 20 minutes. James, Lola, and I, we created some questions based upon their experiences and what we've been seeing in international schools, and that will be for about 20 minutes. Then we'll have a breakout session for 10 minutes. Then we'll go back to our Q&A. Then we're going to ask you, what will you commit to as an educator in international school to promote a positive school culture? And then we're going to ask our guests for their final thoughts. When you go into the breakout room, we're going to ask you, and we're going to write this down actually right now. Think about 1A that you will share during that 10 minutes. Is it something that you agree with, argue, aspire, or what assumptions that you think were made during this conversation? So during your 10 minutes, so if you want, grab a piece of paper, write down your 4 A's, and think about what will you share when you do have that 10 minutes meeting who else we have in this group with us today. So let's get into it. Are we ready? The moment's here, and we have such a great group. Oh my goodness, a beautiful big group. Let's begin. So I'm going to start with Lola, and I'm going to ask, and we're going to have more of a conversation. Do you ever do one of these sessions where like it goes back and forth like a ping pong table? We're not doing ping pong. We're going to have a conversation. We'll see where it goes. And then Yasmin, if she sees a question that might actually be part of what that topic is, she's going to be like, wait a minute, I think there's a great question in the chat. So first question to Lola, and then James will have this conversation is, can you share your definition of a positive school culture? How does it differ in the context of international schools compared to local schools? So Lola, can you start, please?
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I think with school culture, there can be so many different definitions. But I think, the way we'll see it is school culture has a lot of positive school culture, has a lot of things in it. It starts from school behavior, the norms, the policies, the procedures, and the reason why the school itself, it exists. Parents selected international schools to have that international experience for their children, and children also have the opportunity to meet people from everywhere around the world. And then you have teachers as well who are in the school community. It becomes a little global village. So creating a positive school culture, it's making sure that, we value and respect everyone within the community, where they come from, understanding their culture, and, build a relationship with parents, and making sure the culture is positive and contagious within the school culture community.
I love the word contagious. Beautiful, having that spread and become part of the ecosystem. James, what are your thoughts about what Lola said, but from your experiences as well?
Well, I really agree with Lola. Culture is such a complex theme, and there's many, many ways to define it. But if I was to be a little bit simplistic, I think there are 3 ingredients. One is that everyone has a sense of belonging in a positive culture, so that they're known for who they are and they feel respected. And linked to that, that they have a sense of purpose so that they can contribute to the community or the school that they're in. And then linked to that, and that was the quote that we started with, I think there needs to be open, positive, open-minded, respectful relationships that are expression of the culture that's underway. So those 3 things I would look for in a school: a sense of genuine belonging amongst all individuals, a sense of purpose and collective purpose, and positive relationships to accompany that. I think what's unique about international schools, I mean, we could say the obvious point that with multiplicity of nationalities, you have one of the richest educational resources in an international school. And I think that's really important to recognize. I think it's also true that many so-called national schools do have a diversity of national heritage, and we shouldn't overlook that fact. But something I do think is really interesting about international schools is they have an identity challenge in some respects, in terms of how do they fit into the host community that they're in. And that's something I think we should talk about and explore if we're going to talk about a positive culture in an international school, it shouldn't be distinct or isolated from the local and regional culture that it is part of.
Well, you brought up a good point that we don't want the international schools to become silos within whatever country they're in. So how do you start embracing that local culture? But one thing I love is those three that you mentioned, the sense of belonging, purpose, and open-mindedness. You know, I guess I ask everybody right now in the room, if you were to rate your school among those three criteria on a scale of 1 to 10 with different stakeholders, how would they measure themselves? So James, I'm going to follow up on what you just said, because you mentioned something about what are some of those unique challenges that you think schools are facing in fostering a positive school culture in an international setting, particularly with such diverse students and staff population. And I think most people in this room would relate to that in terms of looking at their own stakeholders and their students within their school.
That's a great question. I'm glad you say challenges, by the way, Nancy, because my answer is not about this being a problem, but when you have diversity of cultural heritage and other experiences in life, then that can create a challenge. If a culture is about having some common shared values and a common sense of direction together, then when you have such diverse perspectives within an international community and a very diverse community, then that poses somewhat of a challenge, but it's something we should embrace. I actually see it as a real positive. The other challenge might be if there's a disconnect across groups within the culture. And I could think of a couple of examples. I'll give you one that's really important. I think many international schools tend to recruit internationally in terms of the teaching faculty, but many of the so-called administrative staff and the operational staff tend to be locally hired and locally recruited. And it's really important for a collective positive culture that everyone has that sense of belonging and contribution. And if there's dissonance, if there's disagreement or misalignment between those two groups, then that can create some tension points and some challenges. So that's just one example. I'm also fascinated by that category of student that is actually so-called a local student, or at least someone who is of the national heritage of the country the school's in, and they now join an international school. Sometimes their identity challenge can be really complex and interesting. We often talk about the third culture kids who come from different culture experiences, or their parents come from different cultures. But I'm fascinated by those who are representing the nationality of the host culture, but they're in a very different context to what might be otherwise a so-called typical national school. So it's the identity challenge that can arise within these experiences that is interesting.
The identity crisis, if everybody that's in this room right now, could you agree, disagree, give us a thumbs up or an emoji in the chat? And I would love to hear, Lolo, your thoughts about, is it identity challenge? What are the challenges in your experiences? Because as Lola mentioned, she works with startup schools. So I feel this is an area that you must have addressed many times within your experience with international schools.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. I've kind of like put that into like 4 different points for me. One being the language barrier, the next one being adapting to cultural norms and ethics, and also learning styles and beliefs. This varies from culture to culture, learning outcomes as well, and educational attainments. When you have parents coming into your school, you're working with different people. Often the language barrier is there, and there needs to be a better understanding on how communication is, addressed in the school community to ensure that everyone they're not speaking the same language, but at least they understand each other. So that understanding needs to come in when it comes to the language barrier, and adapting to the cultural norms and ethics, making sure, like James said, we also need to merge what's going on within the international school community with the local schools, or even with the host country as well. And of course, with learning styles as well, when we write our policies, especially our curriculum policies, there are different ways to which in international schools we address different curricular subjects and assessments, and parents also have a different view of that as well. So it's important to keep that communication going with parents and let them understand how it works within the school community and the rationale behind putting all those things together.
So both you, similar approaches in terms of looking at identities, looking at languages, looking with the parent communities. I guess I'm wondering, everyone probably within this group is agreeing. I can see people nodding. So thank you everybody for nodding. Yes, but let's take it further. Now they want those tangibles. So I guess the next step is, what steps do you take, Lola? Looking at what you just said in terms of language and parents, do you take to involve the entire school community? We're talking about all stakeholders, like the students, the staff, the parents, the local community, in developing a positive school culture. What are those tangible actionables that someone could leave this room today and be like, oh, I just heard this from Lola on the loft. These are some steps I could actually move forward with. And what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think, when you think about your school ethos, you think about your mission, you think about your values, it needs to be aligned. There needs to be strategic alignments between this. You need to communicate it to your school community. There needs to be an understanding. And sometimes when these policies and procedures or missions and visions are being developed, it'd be nice to also get input from the stakeholders. It'd be nice to get input from the parents, have your student council be part of that as well. Also, it would be nice to make sure that when you put those policies or those procedures or missions together, they are reviewed regularly and that it's embedded within the school culture every day in everything you do on a daily basis within the school. So any implementation at the school level needs to involve all the stakeholders. I even go up to, the security guard at the gate, the cleaners. Everybody needs to be involved in making those decisions, contributing to those decisions, because it would help the school thrive because everyone would be working towards the same goal.
You brought up a point that James brought up that I just want to continue on with, is the idea of looking at, when we look at culture, at times we're focusing on the staff and students. And as James mentioned, we also have to look at those, I don't like the word support staff, the professional staff, because support staff to me, it's those professional staffs. There's how do we get them involved? So even with this webinar, I bet if I was to do a survey, I bet everyone here, maybe, I don't know if Joachim's here, I knew he registered, is part of the professional, is part of the teaching and learning staff. I wonder if anybody in this room forward this webinar description to someone on their professional staff to learn more about school culture and the impact they have, because at times, as James said, are they always part of that conversation? So Lola, your actionables are getting people, all stakeholders involved. And James, how would you follow up on what Lola said in terms of her actions that schools can do?
Yeah, well, absolutely, fully agree. So Lola was talking about alignment with the big picture thinking of the schools. So the mission, the vision, the values, and the policies that articulate those. And I would fully agree that there should be a review that would involve all of these constituents of a community and a culture. I'd probably say, if possible, there should be a co-construction. So when you start to define what your guiding statements are, whether it's the values or the vision or the strategy of the school, to invite the voices in as much as possible of the students, of the teaching faculty, and this is awkward, isn't it, Nancy? There's not a clear word for support staff, admin staff, operational staff, but for those very important people who actually make a school function, and the parent community as well. So I'd absolutely agree that we should be seeking input. It's a continual feedback loop, if you like, that needs to be built into the school. Now, it's not really possible for every single community member in a school of 800 students, and then that expands to what, 2,000 people, to be able to always contribute meaningfully to policy definition. But we should at least be replicating that intent to listen carefully to all constituents at any given moment, whether that's in the classroom. So, for example, how can students co-construct the learning outcomes of a class? How can others in the adult population co-construct the future of the school? And so there's lots of nested opportunities within a school where you are creating a feedback loop, you're creating listening capacity so that everyone feels that they can contribute in some way, coming back to my earlier definition.
I just had someone give me a private message saying, here's a question for you both. Do you think a school should develop and have a common understanding of what culture means? Like actually start the school year just talking about culture, because usually when the school year starts, we have scheduling, we have when is the orientation for new families, who's doing recess duty. Should we just start blocking time out? Because culture seems like it's a big concern for many people. Should we start having more intentionality of what is culture within the context of their school? Lola, and then James, what do you think?
Yeah, Nancy, I recall doing a professional development training with teachers on promoting positive school culture. And then because they need to understand it and they need to know the reason why it is important for us
Mhm.
as, a faculty to ensure that we are promoting a positive school culture, because it links to, there's a dotted line within school culture that links to everything we do at the school. It just becomes a center of everything that we do. So yes, to answer your question, I think we should definitely be blocking time out to have teachers, have a conversation or forum or professional development on promoting positive school culture, because it's not just the school leader that's responsible for that. It's a collective responsibility. It's a collaborative effort. And, once we do it brilliantly, then we all take the credit for it. We all enjoy the school environment. It's conducive for learning for everybody.
I totally agree. I love the idea of you say it's a collective responsibility. James, your thoughts? Should schools be starting off with, let's forget about the scheduling when we start off in August and just really focus on how do we define culture, or how do we want our culture to look like, sound like, feel like for this school year?
Yeah, absolutely. So we could look at it through different lenses. I'm just thinking about teachers or any professional who joins a school and the induction that they go through. I think what they're most acutely alert to, first and foremost, is what is the culture like? What are the relationships like? What are the values of the school? How are people interacting with one another before you get into the depth of what are the policies and what are the systems, etc. They really want to get a sense of the chemistry within that organization, of how people relate to one another. And that's the same true of a new student. Their radar when they join a school is going really going very intensely scanning around to see, well, how do I fit in? Do I connect to people around me of my age? Do I have a role here? Am I going to be known for who I am? So I think it's important to be very open that it is the most fundamental sphere that matters to someone when they join a new school. What is the culture like? So to be open about that. The one thing I would add to that is I know schools have gone through a journey of let's define what is intercultural education, let's define what is culture. And you can get so hung up on trying to get the perfect definition that it starts to slip by, because it's a very these are very complex human concepts. And it's better just to have an intention to talk about it, knowing that it will continually be reviewed and revised as your understanding grows as a collection of people.
I love it. It's not a finite definition. Going back to how you started this conversation, belonging, purpose, and open-mindedness, those relationships.
Right.
And the funny thing is, James, while you were speaking, we actually had someone write in the chat, it's also difficult for new staff coming in. Who are they trying to figure out how they fit in? I've experienced PD on school culture, but then I don't have my glasses on, but then the lived culture or lived culture was in conflict with the held values. So you're at the school saying we believe in, I don't know, we treat everyone like family or whatever. And then when you're living the culture, it's like, wait a minute, the website said this, but the reality check is there's not that alignment.
Right. And that's why I sort of, you put a quote, which is very kind of you to do at the start. And I was trying to remember why I said that about a year ago, but I think the relationships are the real expression of the culture, how people relate to one another. Are the relationships built on notions of authority and power, or are they generally open-minded, infused with humility and open-mindedness and respect to get to know one another with a mutual sense of understanding? That sort of relationship, I think the latter is the hallmark of a positive school culture.
Nancy, can I just add to what James said as well? I think one good thing about when you talk about positive school culture, or maybe when you have PD around it, is to actually get teachers to be part of those, be facilitators of such PDs. Bring students in as well, just as you will do when you have a school tour for prospective parents to come to your school. Let them hear from other people as well, not necessarily the leader, because we could be just projecting what we want to project as, perfect of our schools. But it becomes a bit more authentic when we have other people's input in that as well. And they can ask them questions as well about the school, how they feel, because when people share how they feel, cite examples of their stories and their experiences, it's just really nice for other people to hear that from, members of the school community.
I totally agree. And would everyone please take a moment? There are some amazing comments in the chat right now. And just give an emoji, a thumbs up, a heart. Read what Paul has written, what Catherine has written. There's really some powerful statements being made in the chat, which I'm actually going to make quotes out of, because I think they're really summarizing what, James, what you and Lola are saying and how it's resonating with those who are attending here. So please take a moment and just give some affirmation of what we see in the chat for now. Wonderful. I see some
Nancy, I saw something about someone saying they have outside consultant come and do some training at the school. And this is one of the reasons why I'm saying sometimes on school culture, it's good to have, members of the school community talk about it as well.
Yes, absolutely. Because sometimes the external person might not have the context of understanding your school, and they're coming in and having, can you imagine if you did have the students and the staff facilitating those discussions? These comments are beautiful. Teresa's here. I love Teresa. She's also added, sometimes I feel we're talking about the culture and climate, and beautiful if you look at Teresa, which she just wrote as well. Okay, everybody, we've been talking for almost, it's already half, but for me, it's 28 after, and this is what I would like you to do. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to have 10 minutes to now process and unpack. You have a good 10 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, could you please think about what would be the 1A that you would share with those that are in your breakout room session? So jot some notes down. Think about, would it be, what do you agree, argue, aspire, or what assumptions you made? I'll share, and we're going to put you in rooms for about 10 minutes and make this an opportunity to get to know one another and also learn from each other. So I'm just going to pause the recording for a minute. Would everyone please now take a minute to reflect upon the conversation you just had? Maybe a person that when you heard whatever story they were sharing resonated with you. What did you gain from that 10-minute conversation? So would everyone please think of a 6-word summary of that conversation? It could be 6 adjectives, a complete sentence, 6 adverbs, but don't press return yet. Type it in the chat.
Hello.
Type it in the chat, and then don't press return yet until I tell you to. So we want a 6-word summary highlighting the conversation you just had in that breakout room. And then we're going to have this chat cascade. So a 6-word summary. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. I have some thumbs up. I see some thumbs up. I got 1 or 2. Thank you, Joachim. Nice to see you. All right, and also you might want to add next to that 6-word summary, a little thank you for the people that you spoke to. All right, everybody, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, press return. Let's read those 6-word summaries and also give a little thank you to the people that you spoke to. Beautiful. Yasmin, thank you so much. Everyone take a moment and read these 6-word summaries. Any trends and patterns in what you're seeing and reading right now? So we have about 40 people here today. Any trends and patterns? We had 10 breakout rooms. And what resonated from those conversations you just had? Vulnerable shares. Thank you, Anna. Culture in an era of technology. Love that, Hala. Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to continue with James and Lola. And now I'm going to ask them to share a story. And that story is, and Lola, I'm going to have you start. Can you discuss a time when a school culture was challenged? I like that word, challenged. How did you navigate through that period to restore a positive environment? And we know this isn't a 2-week, remedy, but what is your progression? So share that situation, which was a bit challenging, and how did you navigate it to restore a more positive environment within that organization?
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I think for me, it's around, school policies on certain procedures that the school have got in place, and parents are not particularly pleased with that. So one of the things we did was do a survey to find out what part of that policy were they not happy about. Okay, and are they happy to come in and we have a conversation around it? How do they see from their perspective? And how are we as educators seeing it as well? And the reason why those policies have been put in place. So we were able to change some aspects of that policy to get the balance right and have alignment between what we want to do as a school regards to our mission, our vision, our ethos, and where parents are seeing it mainly from a cultural perspective, because that was what it was. And it bordered a little bit around sensitive subjects as well. So we needed them to educate us on how they're seeing how that policy works, and what changes would they like to see, or any amendments that they would like to see to that policy. So we had a conversation around it, and we were able to discuss the policy in details, and to be able to put one together where everybody understood what needed to be done and the reason why those policies are in place. So that we got the buy-in from the parents, and we're able to implement the policies across the school.
Well said. So it's almost bringing back what you mentioned earlier of bringing all those stakeholders in to activate their voice and to get their perspective, because that one policy was creating or really corrupting the culture. So it's getting everyone together, activating voice. Beautiful. Thank you. I think a lot of people would recognize that situation. What about you, James? A story where there was challenging school culture, and what steps did you use to restore a more positive environment? Where did James go?
We can't hear you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. So I was going to say there's an easy answer to the question, which we can often give, which is the COVID era. I don't want to go there. I want to go just after the COVID era, when I don't know about participants in this conversation here, whether you experience the same as us as an ICS, but we realized the transience of our school population spiked just after COVID eased, because lots of families had held tight during the COVID. We don't know whether we can go back to our so-called home countries or whether we can relocate to another country because of the pandemic. And that was true of families, students, parents, and also of colleagues. And so 2 years ago, we had significantly more new colleagues join the school. We also had more families join the school. And with that, we had also a movement out of the school. So there's a lot of movement. And if culture is the way we do things is often reduced to that sort of simple statement, then often it's the unwritten stuff within a school. And there's a lot of institutional knowledge that can walk out the door when a lot of people leave. And then if you replace that with a whole cohort of other people who are looking around and they're saying, well, how does this work? Why are we doing this? How do we do this? Are we doing this? And it generated, I sense, a real moment of anxiety amongst the staff population and also potentially amongst some families as we had to navigate the fact there'd been a lot of turnover. It's an unusual period in time. What we did at the time is we acknowledged it, and I think that's really important. So I remember hosting a staff meeting where I said, okay, I'm sensing this is going on. There are these anxieties, and named them. And sometimes just naming and identifying and sharing and trying to account for something, I think can lend a sense of recognition and catharsis to the situation. But the second thing that I want to say that's even more important, ever since that year, I've really been very careful to review what is the induction for someone coming into our culture. What are we really providing? It doesn't matter whether there's 3 people or whether there's 30 people. When there's 30, you notice it, so you have to act. But you shouldn't forget that every year there might just be a small number of people who don't know how things work. And you have to be very sensitive to that, both on the staff population and also on the family population. And I think we have to be very careful in that area.
It brings back also to that new staff orientation, that intentionality of how we do things around here. And also, I love what you mentioned, that I don't know if many leaders do this. I admire you so much, James. So I'm going to give a little shout out to you, that you actually acknowledge that there was frustration among the staff. You have some leaders who just cover it up. They'll start a staff meeting. Okay, everyone, let's talk about, oh, we have moderated grading or we have IAs due soon, rather than calling it and saying it. And then how did you navigate such a conversation? Because that's difficult to all of a sudden say to a staff, because the unpredictability of that conversation is there.
Yeah. I actually linked both things together. So what I tend to do at this time of the year is I meet on a one-to-one with every new colleague who joins the school in the secondary school, and ask them to share what they're appreciating and what are their concerns or what are the challenges they're experiencing. And then I compiled a list of the challenges they're experiencing. So I was able to go back to a whole staff meeting and say, our colleagues are noticing this, 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 and this, and I think this is because of this. And so their voices felt heard. The things that were worrying them were said publicly. I was attributing it to their voice, but also it was resonating with their colleagues around them.
Really powerful to use their feedback, and to actually, after that conversation, you actually use that and share it with the staff. Lots of times those conversations just end once that colleague leaves your office, but you actually did something with it. Lola, your thoughts about that?
I think it's really important to keep making sure that, everyone is involved in the conversation. And I like what James said about naming it, because we cannot shy away from the truth of the matter and what people are facing. And often when the first step to naming what those challenges are is us accepting that it's real and there is a problem somewhere. And sometimes it's also just a relief for, your staff to hear you say, yes, oh, so as a leader that we're facing those things. They feel heard even before you start speaking at all. They feel that, you care about their feeling, you care about what they're experiencing, and you're open to having a conversation around it.
It's that courage to call it out. It really is. It's because then you think, as a leader, I'm doing something wrong because this exists. But actually you're being humble to acknowledge it and work with it through your staff. So our final couple of minutes, I'm going to start with you, Lola, please. Now, knowing we have so many leaders here today, what advice would you give to a leader or an educator, anybody in this room who's just beginning the process of trying to cultivate a positive school culture? That's something we haven't mentioned so far. So we mentioned the stakeholders, we mentioned getting that collective voice, but what other intentionality or what other efforts do you think that really need to be addressed when promoting that positive school culture?
I think, first of all, we need to be inclusive in the way we do things. We need to respect people and their culture and the school community. There needs to be communication and engagement. So just sending information out and not asking for feedback or not wanting to know what people feel or think about that, or open feedback, is not going to help. So there needs to be communication, there needs to be engagement, there needs to be meetings as well. We need to also provide support for students and, to ensure that we hear what they're saying as well. And we know that we are there to support them. So as new school leaders, make sure you make yourself available to, answer questions, be true to yourself, be true to your leadership, and be authentic about it and be honest about it. Gain the trust of your school community, because once they trust you, then they can come to you, they can come and have conversation with you and be open about that. and build that international mindedness within your school community, because that would really help people feel, like James said earlier, they belong within the school community.
So well said. James, what about you? Someone's new to leadership. They're asking you, James, I saw you on this ISO law. What would be the advice in order to start promoting and cultivating a positive school culture that you would say is it's a necessity? It's a non-negotiable. You must do this.
I think you need to learn. I think you need to demonstrate that you're going to learn about the culture in your school. You have to show that you're really open-minded. You have to be inquisitive. You need to listen and not to assume that you have a position where you have already got it. Because as we've said, a few people have said it in the chat and we've said in our conversation, culture is very complex and it's very dynamic and it will keep evolving and adapting. So I think whatever you can lead and you can marshal a culture, I do believe that. But you can only do so by being very sensitive to the voices of all that matter. And it comes back to that definition. If we feel that we belong and that we matter, then we need to be heard. So just to simplify what I'm saying, I'll give one example. In preparing for this conversation today, I did one very simple thing. I've got 2 students who are presenting to our staff tomorrow on their perspective of being neurodivergent students, which is another whole conversation and topic. But I said, look, I'm entering this conversation later, this professional conversation about creating a positive school culture. What do you think that means in our school? And they gave me such brilliant answers. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Go through a process of appreciative inquiry into what your culture is and what it's becoming.
Can you imagine if you started the whole school year having kids answer that? Lola, please add on.
Nancy, I just want to add to that, we, whether as seasoned leaders or new leaders, we need to know that, our school culture, our school community represent our school culture, and that we have to do all we can in creating a positive and sustainable school culture for all our stakeholders, because the stakeholders are lifelong learners, especially if we're dealing with children from a very young age. The positive school culture that we nurture and instill in them is going to carry them throughout their lifelong learning. They're going to take it from one school to another. They're going to take it to universities. They're going to take it from country to country, because we're in an international school, we're in a transient community. They're going to take that everywhere. So it's really important that we are intentional about creating a positive school culture, because it's a skill that, we all need, not only the children, but we all need throughout our current as we work as leaders, as we work as staff, and yeah.
So beautifully said. And just feeling like a sense of belonging.